I would like to now hand over to Malashri Lal to begin the session. Sorry to all of you for keeping you waiting, and over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is a wonderful moment when you see an array of very well-known people on the dais, people who have worked with literature, with film, with social causes, and ready here to pay a tribute to Shunil Da. Shunil is a very common name, but whenever in Bengal and among people who are interested in literature, we use the word Shunil Da. It only refers to one Shunil, and that is Shunil Gangopadhyay. This session is a tribute to him. Shunil Da was very close to the Jaipur Literature Festival. He came here just a few years ago, read his works, met people, had many views to express about life and literature, and a lot of it is available in the Jaipur Literature Festival archives. We remember Shunil Da for many reasons. He started writing as a very, very young man, and then he wrote under synonyms and all kinds of other anonymous names that he gave himself. He played around with words, he developed new forms, and he spoke at many literature festivals and seminars when he talked about his relationship to Rabindranath Tagore. Shunil Da began his life as a rebel against the tradition of Rabindranath Tagore, and he said that he felt he wanted to get away from the classicism of Tagore. He wanted to experiment as an angry young man. He wanted to break tradition. He wanted to experiment with examples of writing that he had got from Europe. He just wanted to create and do new things. What I would like to particularly present at this session is the diversity and variety of what Shunil Da had to offer to the world of literature. One of his most famous novels is Sheishomai, and in it he talks about social change, the reform movement in Bengal, how it was so difficult to break the class barriers, the religious barriers, the problems of integrating people within a society, and the manners in which social reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy or Vidyasagar came into the picture in Bengal and tried to change the attitudes of the people. What we have for you towards the end of the session is a little film about Shunil Gangopadhyay. But before we come to that, I have this wonderful panel of speakers who will read from some of Shunil Da's works and also offer their tribute to Shunil Da. Now, in the novel Sheishomai, which has been translated by Aruna Chakravarti as Those Days, there is a particular passage which marks a moment in the history of education in Bengal and the history of social change. And I will request Sharmila ji to read that passage, and as she reads, I'm sure the context will be clear to you, and she will also offer her comments. Sharmila ji.
But before I read it, this is my first trip to Jaipur, and I think it's so wonderful that the first time I'm addressing the audience here is about Shunil Babu. And as all of you know, and I hope all of you know, that he's the definitive poet of our time. And he wrote in those very turbulent times, in the backdrop of Nakshal movement and student unrest, and his poems meant so much. They became a kind of mantra and inspiration to the voice of youth, to the youth of Bengal. And while he was writing all these things, striking modernity and becoming the contemporary voice, he felt suddenly, where does this time come from? Because to understand today's time, we need to understand where we came from. So as a historian and a researcher, and doing so much with the language, he went back and he tried to understand 19th century and then before that, 19th century and then the Renaissance after that. And that's what is Sheishomoy and Prathom Alo as translated by Aruna Chakravarti because this is the wonderful thing about translation, that you bring it to a wider audience. And that is what Srini Babu also stood for, didn't he? He wanted to expand the horizon and take, and it was very inclusive because he wanted different kinds of influences. He looked for Arabic roots and Urdu roots. And so I think it's a wonderful thing that we are all here in a very sort of a cosmopolitan audience reading. So I'm going to read something from Sheishomoy, which is called Those Days, and you will understand a little bit about those days. Vidyasagar stood on an upper veranda of Sanskrit College, watching the commotion outside the great gates of adjacent building. A young woman of a striking, arrogant beauty and glittering in brocade and jewels had just stepped out of a carriage, holding a young boy by the hand. But as she made her way into the college, she was surrounded by a group of students who tried to bar her entry with cries of, "Are, are, what is this? What is this?" For no woman had ever entered the sacred portals of Hindu college before. The boy whose hand the woman held was about the same age as these boys. His ears flamed with embarrassment and his eyes were fixed on the ground. Hira Bulbul looked neither left nor right. Chin high, head held erect, she swept past the boys and entered the hall. As she approached the staircase, she heard voices from a room. A meeting was going on. Hiramoni took a deep breath and walked in. The members looked up, startled at her entry, and she had the satisfaction of seeing quite a few jaws hang in dismay. "You know me, gentlemen," she began. She could complete her prepared speech, but before she could complete her prepared speech, a member of the board, a native, cried hastily, "Are, are, who let her in? Where are the Darwans? Ram Tehel? Brijwasi?" "My name is Hira Bulbul. Can a Darwan lay hands on me with so many gentlemen present?" "Let us hear what she has to say," an Englishman said peaceably. "Please take a seat, madam." "Are you suggesting, sir," another native member, an exceedingly eminent personage, asked coldly, "that a woman as low and depraved as this one should dare sit down before us? Is it not enough that she pollutes the air of this venerable institution with her presence?" Hiramoni fixed her gaze on him and held his eyes for a long, long time. Her lips smiled, but her glance conveyed the clear threat that, if she wanted to, she could burst into speech any moment. "Ogo Babu, don't you know me? Have you forgotten the nights we've spent together, cuddling in my bed?" But Hiramoni did not say a word. She turned the enigmatic smile. She turned the same glance to the faces of the other four, and an enigmatic smile lifted the corners of her mouth. The Englishman on the board perceived the dilemma of the native compatriots and found it diverting. "We don't understand your attitude," they said. "The woman is a Hindu. Why should her son be denied admission? A prostitute's son? What religion or caste can he claim? Who knows who the father is?" "I know," Hiramoni said. Her eyes rested on the 5 faces. "Shall I give his name?" she asked softly. "Will that be proper under the circumstances?" "But I will, if you press me to. Think about it and let me know." All 5 faces turned pale with horror. Who knows what the she-devil has in mind? Each one of them thought. What if she utters a name? My name. A whole story goes down well with the public. Even newspaper reporters lap it up. I'll be ruined. I'll become the laughing stock of the city. They rose as if in one body and left the room, their jowls quivering in protest. On examining the boy, Chandranath, the English sahibs were pleasantly surprised. He was exceedingly bright, far brighter than average, and very keen to learn. Deeming him fit to study in class 3, they sent for the teacher and handed him over. Hiramani stepped out of the building with the air of a conquering queen and took her place in the carriage. That evening, all the boys of class 3 went home to find their parents in a state of agitation. Their clothes were ripped from their bodies and thrown out into the streets, and they were made to bathe in Gangajal. Meetings were held in Raja Radhakanta Dev's palace in Shobha Bazar, Devendranath Thakur's mansion in Jorashako, and Rajendranath Datta's house in Taltala to discuss the issue and seek redress. What was the country coming to if boys from the first families of the land had to rub shoulders with the sons of pimps and prostitutes? What would the future hold for them? This college, set up by eminent Hindus, was now in the grip of the sahibs, and they were dictating terms. It was intolerable. The next day, the college wore a deserted air. There was only one student in class 3, and that was Chandranath. The Hindu teachers declined to teach him, but the English authorities were steadfast in their resolution. The boy had been admitted into the school, and he would be taught. As Chandranath sat huddled over his books in one corner of the classroom, a teacher, an Englishman, approached him. "Come, my boy," he said. "We shall read poetry today. Have you heard of Byron?" Chandranath rose to his feet and recited softly. "Oh, talk not to me of name, great in story, the days of our youth and the days of our glory." The Englishman listened enraptured. The outcome of the meetings was that a strongly worded letter was lodged with the authorities, protesting against the decision to enroll Hira Bulbul's son in Hindu college. But the latter stood firm. Prostitutes were not born, they argued. They had been created by this very society and been nurtured for ages because they fulfilled a social need. Yet, they were rejected by the very people who couldn't do without them, and this rejection went beyond them and extended to their children. There were prostitutes in England too, but their children were not denied education. Why should Indian prostitutes be treated so unfairly? Sitting in his office on the first floor of Sanskrit College, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar heard what was going on next door. But it did not concern him, for barring the English lessons, he had nothing to do with Hindu college. That night, as he walked down Sukia Street on his way back home, he found himself being followed by a young woman. It was well past midnight, and a mild rain was falling. He walked away from her as fast as he could, but the woman was desperate. Running after him, she clutched his arm. Vidyasagar shook her off and walked on, but after a few yards, he stopped and turned back. She stood where she was. She was very young and frail with a tense, anxious face. "What are you doing here so late at night?" he asked. "Go home." The girl sighed. She could see his face now. He was only a poor Brahmin, a cook perhaps, in some rich household. She cursed her luck. She had wandered in the streets half the night in the falling rain, only for this. "What else can I do, Thakur?" she asked. "I haven't had a single customer tonight. I have no money. What shall I eat?" Vidyasagar lowered his eyes. What right had he to sit in judgment on the girl for what she did for a living? This society denied education to its women and forced them into marriage when they were mere infants. Then, if a woman was unfortunate enough to lose her husband, all the pleasures of life were denied her. She was cheated of her husband's property by grasping in-laws and treated like a servant in the family. She might even be turned out of the house. Then, when she was reduced to selling her body in order to feed herself, the brand mark of shame and rejection was stamped on her forehead. Hira Bulbul's encounter with the authorities of Hindu College had exposed much of the rot that society hid so cleverly. Tears rolled down Vidyasagar's cheeks. Taking out all the money he was carrying, he handed it to the girl with the words, "Don't walk about in the rain anymore, child. Go home." Then turning, he walked away as fast as he could. "Oh, Thakur," the girl called after him. "Why do you give me money for nothing, Thakur? Come to my room, and I'll pleasure you well, Thakur." Vidyasagar covered his ears with his hands and started running down the road.
Thank you very much, Sharmila ji, for that very soulful reading of a very moving moment in that novel. And I do remember Shunilda reading out the passage in Bangla, and when he spoke those words, when Hira Bulbul is asked, "Who's the father of your child?" And Hira Bulbul turns around and says, "Bolbo, shotti, tomader ki bolbo? Shall I tell you? Shall I really give you the answer?" And he captured the moment when all the men in the room were utterly, utterly nervous. So thank you for reminding us of that passage. I wonder if you have to say something about the relevance of this kind of a scene, this kind of a subject to our modern lives.
But before that, what I like about him, that he distances himself. He takes that slightly critical approach to while he's all there and he's using the words as it was, the structuring of everything as it was to convey, and yet he is looking at it from another perspective. So what he also says that that time, the Renaissance didn't really come to everybody equally. It was a kind of a fashionable thing that was happening. A lot of people were engaging with it. But when it came to their daughters, when it came to something else very close, they were also not, the rest of the book also has glimpses of that, which I find very riveting. And yes, talking about that, what was happening then, and even now, things have, I guess, have changed at another layer, at another level. But when you really go deep down and delve further, we have a long way to go, don't we? There is so much, the society is so judgmental, and somehow the women are, the probity on women, or looking at women, one is so without compassion or without, whereas a man can do what he wants and get away with it. But for a woman is somehow is the upholder of the dharma, of everything. And somehow, if the woman's standard falls, it is so much the worse. So I think that way the equality after 65 years, we have failed, I would say, to bring that gaze of equality between a man and a woman. And of course, don't forget that we all have to be worthy of respect. If we don't belong to a social institution or domestic, like a marriage, like if you have a live-together relationship or anything like that, then it's frowned upon. So you're not worthy of respect. So I think that needs to really looked at and change. And hopefully we will get there soon.